Okay, welcome back. We're continuing in the Tzurba Rabbanon. We're in volume 18. Today is Shir 4 in here. It's Shir number 8 in Malacha of Bishul for us, and it's Shir number 22 overall since we started Hilchot Shabbat with the Tzurba Rabbanon series. Hilchot of Chazara. What is going on with Chazara? What was Chazara, and what are we worried about? Thank you. The first thing to understand is that page 167. Chazara literally means to return. Okay, you're returning, which means you're returning a food to a source of heat. Okay, and there's the number one issue with this is it looks like you're cooking. All right, it looks like you're cooking. I don't know any better. I see a guy taking a food, putting it on a fire. What am I to think? I didn't talk about open, close, what, yes, nothing yet. I'm just saying he's cooking. Guy's taking food, he's putting it on a source of heat, he's cooking. So, because of that issue, the Chama made a gezer. And they made conditions of what you need to do in order to place something on a source of heat on Shabbat. So everybody who knows that it's not cooking. It's not mechazeh kimavashel. It doesn't look like you're cooking. This is the issue with Chazara. Now, exactly what the conditions are, people count different conditions. Between Sephardim and Ashkenazim, there are different opinions also. What's some of the conditions? And it's based on the Talmud and based on other sources. So today, Be'ezat Hashem, let's get in. The first source we're going to look at is the Rambam. Okay, Rambam in source number 1, he writes, anytime, kosher mutter l'shato al gabei esh, kishnot l'moto b'Shabbat, asur l'achzir l'mkomo. Anytime that you have food on top of a fire and you remove it on Shabbat, you're not allowed to put it back onto the fire. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, we're talking about an open flame. You take a pot from an open flame, there's no way you're allowed to put it back on an open flame. That for sure is always asur on Shabbat. Even if it's completely cooked, you can't do it. Okay, open flame, definitely not. Now, why not? Why not? So says the Rashba in source number 2 on page 168. Says the Rashba, Agabe Eish Mamish Aser, Mipnei Shirit Shinira Kimivashel. It looks like you're cooking. You can never put something on a direct flame on Shabbat because it looks like you're cooking. Okay? The Sefer HaYashar. Who's the Sefer HaYashar? It's a Rishon, it's Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam is all over the Tosfot, the most quoted person in the Tosfot, but he also has his own Sefer HaYashar. And there he writes that also we're worried about the person stoking the flames up and down, right? If he has it on a flame, he's going to come to adjust the flame. That was the same issue we had last week with Shehiyah, the problem with stoking the flame. Okay? So those are the two issues when it comes to Hazara. Number one, we're worried it looks like you're cooking, right? And number two, we're worried that you're going to up and down the flame to adjust the heat in order to make the food edible. So now the Chachamim come and they make certain conditions that you need in order to return the food. These conditions are in place in order to make sure that everyone realizes you're not cooking, that you're just heating up and it's not cooking. Now, the first condition he writes over here, the Tzurba writes the first condition, it's really not a condition, it's really a fact. The number one thing, it has to be completely cooked. If something that's not cooked, you're putting it on a flame, right? You're putting on a heat source and it's cooking, that is Bishul deoraita on Shabbat. Taking something that's not cooked and making it cook, that's an issue of Bishul, Shabbat deoraita. So we're talking about here has to be completely cooked, meaning in order to return something to the flame, or in order to return something to whatever heat source is permissible to return it to, it has to be completely cooked. Okay? Talk about the flame in a second. The first thing, the food. As for the food has to be completely cooked. Can't be 50% cooked. Right? I heard sometimes in restaurants, they cook stuff halfway, and then when it comes to the time, they put it on. You can't do that on Shabbat. Even if you're putting on something, because that is going to go from non-cooked to cooked. That's a problem of Bishul on Shabbos, the Oraita. So it has to be, number one, the food has to have been completely cooked. Okay. Number 2, he writes there in the Tzurba, according to his list, he says the second thing is it has to be gerufa or ketuma. Okay, it's either or. What is gerufa and ketuma? Last week we saw what was gerufa. Gerufa is sweeping away the coals, right? Because the way they used to make the oven. So take a look at the next page. Okay, take a look at the picture. This is the kira. This was the oven that they had in the Talmudical times. They had coals inside. Okay, this is the coals. You have to sweep away the coals, take away the coals. That's the gerufa. Okay, ketuma is when you take ashes and you throw it over the coals. That makes the coals heat less, and it doesn't have the power to cook. Okay, so that's ketuma. It's either or. It doesn't be both. I know you say grufa ketuma. It sounds like both, but it's either or. Okay,
take out all the coals. There's not oven
anymore. That's the thing. Those ovens retained heat. Right. You also have that. You'll see that in Hilchos Pasakum, right? It says the Shulchan Aruch writes that if the fire it's the heat of the oven is still hot, it's still Pas Yisrael, even though it changed. Right? It went down as long as it's still heat. So the heat source is still there, the residual heat. Okay, so that residual heat you can't cook on it, so you can use that to return on Shabbat. If you take a look at this Gemara over here towards the end of the Mishnah, the end of that Mishnah on source 170. Beishamai Armin Noitlin of a loy machzirin. Beishamai say when you have a kira that's grufa ktuma, you can take from it on Shabbat, but you cannot return it. Ubeit Hillel omrim af machzirin. Beit Hillel says you can also put back on this kira that is gerufa or ktuma. And says Rashi, take a look at Rashi in source 6. Why does Beishamai not let you return it? Shammai says, you're returning something to the kira. Even if it's grufa ktuma, it still looks like, according to Beit Shammai, it looks like cooking. But the Beit Hillel will say, it's already swept out, so it does not look like cooking. So here we see that the heat source has to be seen that it's not a real heat source, meaning it's not direct flame, and everyone has to know that you're not cooking. How far does this go? Because I want you to take a moment right now to understand when you put a blech, right, or even a hot plate, what is that status of that hot plate or that blech? Is it only girufa ktuma, or does it have another din that it's hefsek kedera, okay, which means there's a pot in between? Is that the pot in between? We see Ashkenazim and the Maran Shalom Tzion had very different understandings of what the blech does, and it makes a difference what you can warm up on that blech. For this moment, you have to understand that we're up to right now is that the heat, the actual fire cannot be there. Either has to be ashes or it has to be removed. Some lesser degree of heat. Okay, now that's condition number 2. Here he brings down. The Tzurba brings down condition number 3 on page 170 is it has to be on top and not inside. You take a look at source number 8. Source number 8, Rav Chelbo over there. Take a look in the middle of it. Till Amr Mach Machzirin. Rav Chelbo, Amr Rav Chama, Bar Guria, Amr Rav, Loishanu Ela al Gaba Avol Tocha Asur. Okay, only if it's on top and not inside. What's the difference? Because if you take a look at that picture on page 170, you see the pot inside and the pot on top. Apparently, in the Talmudical times, the proper way of cooking, and you want to get more heat, was cooked inside. Okay? Outside was not used to really cook unless it's serving foods, whatever it was. It could be, but it wasn't the normal way of cooking. Warm or more delicate foods, whatever it is. So says, according to Beit Hillel, who says you can put back, says Rav Chelbo, you can put back only on top. You can never put back inside. Okay. Now, the Mishnah Berurah now says, one second, what about our stove tops? There's no inside in our stove, right? The stove top, right? There's no inside. It's just the top. Okay. And it cooks. That's the way of cooking. So says the Mishnah Berurah, he says, he says concerning the stoves that do not have an inside or a hollow space, but are simple with the interior and the top being one is permitted since they do not have the status of an interior. There is no toch. So if there's no toch, there's no toch. So it's just al gaba. That's what Mishnah Berurah says. There's no toch because there's no toch, and therefore it's gaba. That's what it is. Therefore, you're allowed to return it to the stove top as long as it's gerufa uktuma. Now, what about the oven? What about the oven? How to use the oven? Stove. So it's inside. So says the Shevet HaLevi, says Rav Wozner. Now, besides the other issues of the oven we spoke about last week, and we'll speak again about this week, question is right now, is it toch or not considered toch? So says Rav Wozner, it's not considered toch because there's no gaba, right? There's no top, so there's no toch. So it's not considered a kira in that sense that you can't put it inside. You could put it inside. That's what Shevet HaLevi said. Does not have a top and an interior, since it's all an interior with uniform heat, right? So this goes back to the tanur. Take a look at the bottom, the tanur, the picture of the tanur. The tanur was something that you really used inside, and the way it was shaped and built, you can never use it on Shabbat because the heat would go to a specific place. In our ovens, it doesn't do that. It's supposed to be uniform heat. So therefore, it doesn't have a status of a tanur, has the status of a kira. It's not a toch because there is no toch in gaba, so therefore you're allowed to put it inside. Okay? Even for Chazara, as long as the other conditions are met. There are a lot of conditions when it comes to this. Okay? Is the oven the cover between the broiler, right, and that metal sheet in between, and the oven itself, is that gufa ktuma, right? Ushtoch Chamuvadia seems to be saying that it is, right? Rav Moshe, we said last week already, wasn't with that. He said you have to put a metal box inside. Okay, you have to put a metal insert into the oven, and that would be your blech in the oven, and it has to be a box that's all over because the fire is everywhere in the oven. Okay, but if you had gerufa ktuma, let's say you had it, the oven is not considered toch. You're allowed to put it back inside. Okay, that is some of the conditions. Now we're going to come to condition 4 and 5. These conditions are not hard conditions. I mean, it's not always has to stay. All right, and exactly how these conditions play out here, there's the big difference between Sephardim and Ashkenazim when it comes to this condition, gabe liquids. Okay, because we'll see with cooked food, putting it back in the blech is less issues for us, more issues for them. But at least for liquids, a difference, especially on this and these conditions. What is going on over here? Okay, so here is a Gemara in Masechah Shabbat, source number 11. Betilu Omrim Af Machzirin, Omrav Sheisha the Reha Omrim Machzirin. According to those that you put it back, feel b'Shabbat. I'm not here feel b'Shabbat. Okay, that's the first thing. You can return on Shabbat. Fine. Omrav Zeik, Omrav Rabbi Abba, Omrav Rabbi Tadai. Lashanu El she'oden biyado. Oh. Aval hanichan al gabe karka also. The Gemara says you have to still have it in your hand in order to return it. Once you put it down on the floor, you can't return it. Okay? How do you understand this Gemara? Does it really mean you have to hold it the whole time? Or does it mean that you can't put it just on the floor? See, the Rambam is going to come out just you can't put it on the floor. That's what Shulchan Aruch is going to go with. But the Ashkenazim say you have to hold it. Right? So if they take a soup and they want to serve it, they take it off, right? They have one guy holding it, and then they serve it from there, and then they can put the soup back on. Because otherwise, you can't put it back, right? According to what they're saying, right? But let's go through this. Fine. So you have to hold it. And the guy with karka also. Rav Ami, Rav Tadai the Avad, the Gamre who the Avad. Whoever he said for himself. El Hachim Rav Chia, Rav Yochanan. Oh no! If you put it on the floor, it's mutter. Can you put it on the floor? You cannot. Another opinion. Rav Dimi, Rav Shmuel, Bar Yehuda. Tavai Mashvei Rabbi Lazar Amrei. Chad Amar Odam Biyado Mutar. Agabe Karka also. Chad Amar Hanichal Agabe Karka Nami Mutter. So putting it on the floor might be mutter. Some say you have to leave it in your hand. So this Gemara really, so far, we don't have a final opinion. So Amar Chitzim Mishvei Abayo. On source 170, on page 174. Says Chizkiah in the name of Abaya, holding it in your hand is not enough. You have to have thought about putting it back. You didn't have thoughts to put it back? Awesome. If you put it on the ground, even if you thought about putting it back, you can't do it. Okay. Another opinion. You have a lot of opinions here. Okay. You put it on the floor and you had a mind to put it back. It's okay. As long as it's still in your hand, so as long as it's in your hand, even if you didn't think about it, you can still put it back. So different opinions. Do I need to hold it in my hand? Do I need to think about putting it back? Do I not put it on the floor? Can I think about putting it? It's a lot of different opinions. So what do we do with this Gemara? So the Rosh, he over here, he says lechumra. And he says va'avidinan lechumra. We go lechumra. You need to think about returning it, and you need to hold it in your hand. That's the Rosh. And the Ran says, you know why? The Ran says even the Afagav the Kohani Mil with the Rabbanon. Let's probably answer Ravami's question. So last he goes, this is why we're always making some exercises. Hold the Rabbanon. He says, the Kivin Shishmash the Kamachlik Ben Dorsai, Leisma Mishum Vashal Doraita, according to the Ran, we say it does. Right? If you care for Machman Dorsai some more, it is. Once you start letting certain things, people are gonna take advantage. You let one thing, you let a finger, give a finger, and take the hand, right? So you let one thing, it's gonna be a problem. So you marry machmer and make it also unless you have the da'atola achzir and you have it in your hand. Here's the Rambam. This is a famous Rambam. This is what Shulchan Aruch goes with. Says the Rambam, very simple lashon. V'har shelo hiniach kedei al gabi karka aval mishanicha al gabi karka ein machzirin oto. So he says, as long as you don't put it on the ground, you can put it back. Put it on the ground, can't put it back. That is the Rambam. Nothing. So says the Bet Yosef, I don't understand this Rambam. That's no shita in the Gemara. Right? The Gemara's final shita was Abaya. Da'atola hachzir or not da'atola hachzir? Floor or hand? He's skipping. He's no da'atola hachzir. The last opinion of the Gemara was da'atola hachzir. So says the Bet Yosef, perhaps the Rambam is not looking at those last Omarayim. He's going back to the earlier case with do you need to hold it in your hand or you can't put it on the ground? The first time the Gemara brought it, the first time Arayim brought it, they didn't mention Da'atola Achzir or not. So the Rambam says about yourself, the Rambam is going with those first opinions. He's not even paying attention to the last Amoraim, and therefore he says it all has to do with going on the ground or not. Okay, that's the way the Rambam comes out. Now, one last thing before we go to Halach L'Maaseh, the last idea is the Gemara Masechah Shabbat asks a question: what about if I don't put it on the ground? Hanichal al gabe mata mahu. I put it on the bed, put it on a stick, put it on a chair, put it on a counter. It's not the floor. Is that Hanichal al-Karka? Because the Rambam says putting it down, there will be a problem. So is that Hanichal al-Karka or not? Okay, so let's see. Let's see. So now we're going to come to the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, and you're going to see their machokin. So this is Sephardic and Ashkenazic psak right now. Okay, take a look. Says the Shulchan Aruch in source 17. So perhaps the karka, the issue with the karka, perhaps the karka shows that I'm not interested in cooking anymore. That my cooking has stopped. Right, putting it on the ground means I'm not cooking anymore. As long as it's not on the ground, that itself means I'm ready to put it back. All right, we're not going. That's probably a distinction. Okay, Rabbi Yosef. Source 17. Let's see Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. What do we actually do? Okay, so in source 17, says Shulchan Aruch, Kira Shehi, you have a Kira that's Grufa Viktuma. Okay, first thing, it needs to be Grufa Viktuma. It has to be either coals swept or ashes over the coals. But not like Kedera Me'alei or Fil B'Shabbat. And if you take a Kedera, you took a pot from it even on Shabbat, Mutter Lachzir Kols Man Shirotech. As long as it's still hot, because we're talking about liquids, okay? Liquids has to still be still hot. Okay? Now, says the Ramah. This is the Ramah next, the Hagar, right? V'odah b'yado. It has to still be in his hand. Okay? The Shulchan Aruch doesn't say anything about still being in his hand. It doesn't have to be in your hand. You don't have to still hold it. Okay? Says the Shulchan Aruch, the next line, Lo hanicha al gabe karka. As long as you didn't put it on the floor. Okay? And says the Ramah, V'dato l'achzira. But he has to have in mind to put it back. So according to the Ramah, you have to hold it, and you have to have in mind to put it back. Shulchan Aruch, v'davka al gaba, aval letocha asur. Okay, we already saw this. Today everything is gaba. Everything's considered on top of the of the kira. Nothing's considered inside. And says the Ramah, v'davka she'atav shel mavushal kol tzarfa. Not everyone agrees. Just explaining that it means everything has to be kol tzarfa. So you come out here Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah have a pretty significant machloket over here. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't say you have to hold it. Shulchan Aruch doesn't say you have to have in mind to put it back. Straight with the Rambam. As long as you don't put it on the ground, you're good. Okay, as long as if it's a liquid, the pot still has to be yad soledet bo, according to the way Sfardim are learning, right? The Rambam would say you can put back a liquid even if it's completely cooled, right? That's another issue. Okay, we're not dealing with that issue for a second. Okay, but putting it back, fine. What conditions you need now? Fine. Now the Mishnah Berurah, he says, I know the Ramosh says you need to have both the Odah B'Yado and the Atol Hachzir, but he says that you have either or. So Ashkenazim, as long as they have either or, they can be somech on that in cases of a need. My hand's still on it, or I'm thinking to put it back. Okay, but in a shas chak tzarich, they need to do it. They can do it. That's the Mishnah Berurah, and the same thing he writes over there. At the very least, if still one's hand and one did not have intent to return it, he can still do it. As long as it's still in his hand, even though he didn't have to laugh, he can put it back. One or the other, says the Mishnah Berurah, says the Chafetz Chaim, one or the other. You don't need to have both for the Ashkenazim. In practice, now we're going to come to the Ashkenazic practice over here. Orchot Shabbat. Orchot Shabbat writes, not to keder meish group of the ketuma al dat lahzira im henicha gabi karka ein lahach the keder al ha'esh. You shouldn't put it back. You shouldn't put it back to the fire. Okay, once it's on the floor, you shouldn't put it back. Okay, so the floor seems to be a hard stop. Once it goes to the floor, don't put it back. Says in Orchot Shabbat in the next source in 21, one remove the pot of fire from the group of ketuma with intent to return and then place it on the chair. One may be lenient and return it. And the Chazon Ish rolls that even if one removed the pot without datolach there and placed it on a chair, you still can put it back. Okay, so it seems putting it on the chair does not have the status of karka, at least for the Chazon Ish and the Orchot Shabbat. The next piece, if one removed the pot from a fire that was gufak to man, placed it on a kitchen counter, some say it's just like the chair, and it's not a problem. Okay, what about the Yalkut Yosef, the next source in 22? The Yalkut Yosef says, "Anotel keder al ha'esh b'Shabbat asar lo lachzir l'sham, ulam b'tnayim mesuyamim mutar lachzir et tafshil b'Shabbat." Okay, then he goes through the conditions. And shlo nicha et hakeder al gabe karka elo al gabe mita kisei or safsal or shulchan v'chedoima. It's not considered karka. So it says the Yalkut Yosef, hard. If it's floor, that's the problem. Anything else, not a problem. Okay? So not karka lama. Yeah. He wants to say the counter. So there is a difference. So there are poskim that say put a towel on the counter before you put something on there. Yeah. There is. One second.
אני אומר, הקרקע שלהם זה לא היה כמו היום אבנים וכל הדברים.
בחומר שהקרקע זה כל קרקע.
אבל החול מקלל את זה מיד. אתה שם את זה ומקלל את זה.
What is the reason that the floor is considered to be no good anymore and you cannot put it back on the fire? Because when you're putting it on the floor, you're setting it aside. That's it. I'm not putting it back. The same thing. That's when the last time you put it on the counter shows that you're not
today a counter זה הקרקע שלנו.
מה לא? לא רוצה להסתיר, אני
פעם היו קרקע, לא היה להם קיצ'ן.
לא משנה, תגיד מה זה קרקע.
שים לב ללשון, Check.
Getting heated up over there.
Give me 1 minute. Give me 1 minute.
היית משתמש בקרקע פעם נניח את זה? במה אתה משתמש היום?
ומה זה אומר? רגע, זה אומר שאתה התפטרת מזה, אני לא רוצה... אתה רוצה להגיד לי שהיה להם משהו לשים את זה על השולחן?
מיטה,
לקחו את זה מהדירה, לא שמו את זה על משהו?
כל הדברים הקאנטר שלנו מחובר לקרקע.
Sounds like I'm on the bazaar right now.
הוא לא צריך קאנטר.
Okay.
דברים שאני יכול להוציא.
Halacha berura brings down that placing it on the counter, even if it's made of stone, according to many poskim, it's not considered karka. Halacha berura. But halacha berura says, because there are those who say counter is karka, you should put a towel or a plate under the pot, even when placing it on the counter. Okay? Okay? You should put something there. So there is this talk. There is this talk. The real question is, you see, the Rambam said karka, and the Gemara is saying karka. It seems to be that these ones will say that's really karka, that karka, putting it on the ground, even though we don't do that today, but the ground shows I'm not cooking anymore. I'm putting it. So the counter, you can say perhaps it's cooking because I'm on the counter. I play with my stuff. I'm putting the spices. I'm moving this. I'm moving that. Take on. I put off. Perhaps. And there are those who want to say, like Jacket is saying, that counter is not movable. It's not able to, and it's actually the counter should be considered karka. So there is those deot that it's preferable. Put a towel. Put something there. But if you didn't, you have to be so mechan that it's not karka. Okay. Now.
Put on the floor, but you put something down.
Maybe that's not karka. Yeah, so Rami is asking a question. What happens? Can I put a towel on the floor and put it on the towel? All right, so it's.
You want to take a soup?
No. But the question, it's if you're telling me my counter is a karka and the towel works, would the towel work on the floor? I'm sure. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, but we say we don't need that. It's galedat. You don't need the dot. It's galedat. I don't know. Maybe I have floor that I don't want it to get scorched from the pot. Yeah, put a towel on the floor. I don't know. Anyway, it's not really that practical. So let's continue. So where are we holding? Okay, now the Ran comes with another idea. And the Ran comes and says the Yerushalmi has another issue. The Yerushalmi says another heter. The Yerushalmi says the whole issue of returning is if you took it off Erev Shabbat. But if you took it off on Shabbat, you can put it back. You don't need any of this Tanaim. You don't need any of these conditions. There's a Yerushalmi. He writes over here. Look at it. Take a source 23. Natlu b'od yom, machzir b'od yom. Natlu mishachei shecha, machzir machashecha. Natlu b'od yom, v'kadesh alav yayom. Rav Simon bar Tadai b'shem Rav Oshia im hanichu aser l'tiltilo. He says if you took it off during the day when it's Friday and you put it down afterwards, that you can't do. According to this, if he said dafka b'natlu b'od yom, hud machmirim. Avanatlu mechashechei shecha. Apilo nicha gabe karka mutter lachziro, says the Ran. As long as it was on when Shabbat came, I can take it off, put it back. I can put it in the fridge, put it back, because I took it off when it was on Shabbat. It was there on Shabbat. I can take it off. That's the Ran based in the Yerushalmi. This is a bit cooler. Says the Ramah. The Ramah brings this down as a yesh omer. The kol zein is sirakish not lemina kira mevod yom on Friday. Below until it's dark, you can bring it back. When it gets dark, I feel nichal gabi karka mutter. V'chein nohagim lahakel b'tanurim shalanu sheyesh lahem din kira v'sayimchem atzmam al divrei hamakelin. He writes v'toiv la'achmer. It's good to be machmer and not to use this kula, but If they cool down completely, right? Because Ashkenazim say as long as it's still room temperature, right? It's still somewhat considered warm. You can put back the liquid. If it's cool down completely, then even Ashkenazim say you can't cool up liquid on Shabbat. So then you wouldn't be able to do it. But it says the Ran that based on the Ran, the Ramah says something was on Shabbat, and I took it off. Even I put it on the karka and put it back. Now he says Tov lahachmir. And the Shirat Shabbat Kilchata also says Tov lahachmir. You should be machmir in this. But Shirat Shabbat Kilchata writes that in a case where a person accidentally took off the wrong pot, where does it happen? The wife said, "Go take the pot off the blech." Right? Never do that. Never tell your wife, "Don't send the husband. He's gonna mess it up. He doesn't know what he's doing." Right? She sends him. He's a very nice guy. He wants to do the wife. He pulls off the wrong pot. She comes and says, "What'd you do? That's the pot for tomorrow morning." Okay. Meanwhile, he already put it on the ground, or he didn't have that tola achzir. He already put it down from his hand. So says in this case, you can hold of this Ran and this Ramah that since it was already put on Shabbat, it was there on Shabbat. You took it off. You can always return it. So in such a case, they would use it. Okay. So far for us, from the condition of putting it down and datol hachzir, we don't need no datol hachzir. We don't need any condition to think about putting it back. We do not need to be holding it. Only thing that we have to be careful is not putting it on the ground. Okay. Okay, so there are Ashkenazim, and he is Sfaradi. So the question is, if he does it, they can definitely eat the food. They could definitely. The question would be, can they tell him to do it? Can they tell him to do it? That would be the question. Okay, but it seems to be that they would be able to, because they have all these different coolers that you can put syrup together, and it should be fine.
My son will say that the yeshiva, the Ashkenazim, they will tell them open the caps.
Right.
They cannot do it,
and we can. Right.
That's what I'm saying. The money can make a soup
right
on Shabbat also.
Right. Right. Yeah. I just said you can tell the Tamani put the soup back on. Yeah. Yeah. The Alkuch supposed to bring that down. You can tell Tamani to do it. Okay. Okay. Now, first thing, Chazara in modern appliances. So we talked about Grufa Ketuma, we talked about the Kira. What happens, Lamaisa, in our kitchens? We don't have Kiras, we have stoves and ovens. So what do we do? So the Alkut Yosef in source 26, here he talks about putting it into our electric ovens. Okay, putting it into our oven.
What's the difference between the Kira and the
Either or. Wouldn't make a difference.
It's really different between Kira and Tanur, though.
Yes, Kira and Tanur is different. Tanur would have a spot in the Tanur where it has very, very hot. And it wouldn't be uniform heat throughout. Our ovens don't have that. It's supposed to be uniform throughout. Therefore, it's not considered a Tanur. Therefore, it's considered a Kira, which is not as hot as a Tanur. Okay, so he writes, it's better not to use the oven on Shabbat because it has the appearance of cooking. But he says, but if you're able to do the Tanayim of Achzara, which is, it has to be fully cooked, right? And it has to be Grufa Ketuma, okay? Mutter lachzira gam l'toich tanur hanisker. You're allowed to put it even into this oven, okay? So you're allowed to do Achzara into an oven if you have the Tanayim of Achzara.
What's that?
So here we take a look. Okay. Now, here Rabbi Nachson brings about the reheating, and he brings it very nice in the oven. So here, Rabbi Nachson on outside of the Tzurba for a moment, page 438 in my book, Laws of Shabbat. Look at he writes over here. In order to reheat food in an oven on Shabbat, first of all, the oven should have a Shabbat mode. We talked all about this last week already. Okay? So it doesn't open, it doesn't start when you're opening and stuff like that, right? Okay. Furthermore, the heating elements of the oven must be covered. Okay. Now we already saw that according to Svaradim, according to Chamabaji seems to be saying, he says that the broiler, that metal in between, that's already a separation.
Yeah.
That is a kupak tuma. Some are more machmer and they put something inside over the flame. Okay, but we would say it is considered gufa. It's because it's a heat shield. Okay, not a direct fire. And the item that is being heated up must be fully cooked, right? So I'm sorry, it has to be fully cooked. And if it's a dvar lach, it has to be for Sfaradim, it has to be yatzuledet bo, right? But then he writes one more thing. One must also place the food on a sheet or a pan in order to show that one is not actually cooking in the regular manner on Shabbat. So it has to be in a pan that you don't usually put in the oven. It has to be something that shows that it's not cooking. Remember, the whole thing is mechazek kimavashel, right? Okay.
If you do with the sear, do with the tafni. If you do with the pot, do with the tray.
Right. Whatever you don't usually put in the oven. So
I was asking that Daniel.
Yeah.
He says, since the way the cooking oven is by 9 by 13 pan,
Okay.
or this type of pan, then what you should do, you should use the same pot that you should use on the stove and stick that into the oven. So everybody knows that nobody puts such a pot
Puts a pot
the
inside.
oven.
Okay.
9 by 13, everybody puts.
Puts inside. So they ain't not allowed to do it for Chazara.
Not being quick in the oven. So take a pot and put that in the oven.
Right.
To show them it's
Okay.
different.
Right.
When you're not
Right.
cooking.
So Tzion says very good from Rabbi Eliyahu that you have to use a pot, use a pan, use something that you don't usually use on top of the stove. Use that, put it inside the oven so you see that it's not the way you usually cook, right? Because you don't usually put a pot and pan that you use on the stove, you don't put it inside. Okay, so it shouldn't be a 9 by 13, it shouldn't be one of those stone things that you use to cook inside. It should be something that everyone can see. It's not mechazek mevashel. Because you're right, it's grupa, right? But I always cook with this grupa. Right, that's the way I always cook inside my oven. So it still looks like mechazek mevashel, right? So therefore, you have to use something else in order to show it's not mechazek. The last part is, right, this has to do with shehiyah as well. You don't want to make the flame. So Shabbat mode, it counts as all the things. You can't touch anything. If you don't have the Shabbat mode and your thing, we already spoke about last week, how you can use it. Put sign, Shabbat, take away the knobs and stuff like that. That's another thing a person should do if he's using the oven for Chazara. But there is a way. There is a way. Okay? It's possible. I don't think most people do it. I think there are individuals that do it, but most people don't just deal with their blech on the top and they don't use the oven. Maybe because most people don't have Shabbat mode on their ovens.
No,
Okay.
it's complicated.
It's complicated. Okay.
So you always
Fine.
return to Avraham.
Okay, so Yalkut Yosef permits it.
Yeah, but it's much less.
Right, just because you're taking it out, you're not putting it back. Right. So she has different. Right. But the concepts are they play back and forth. Okay. Shmirat Shabbat Gilchata, Rabbi Newworth. He says don't put it back in an oven. He says don't put it back. And it's possible the Rabbi Newworth is saying don't put it back in the oven because he doesn't hold that that separation between the flame and the oven, it's not grufa because it's always there. So it's not considered a grufa. Right, it's not a heat shield. It's not, for them it's not. In fact, Rav Moshe in source 28, Rav Moshe says you need in order to reuse the oven, you need to put it in a box, in a metal box inside. Because that's now going to be a grufa. Because otherwise you don't have grufa. Remember, it's a very big cooler. Chamavaj is saying that the fact that it's covered, that's the grufa. And he's saying, no, you have to make a cover to it. Okay. Rabbi Ribiat, in his 39 Melachot, deals with the blech itself. Right? The blech is the metal sheet that you put over the fire. And Ribiat says the whole blech is not equal. Okay? He says that there are certain parts in the blech that the food can get to Yad Seledet Bo. Right? The ala ish, and next to it where you can get Yad Seledet Bo. And then there are further parts of the blech which is considered counter space because it can never get so hot. Okay, so you have to pay attention. If you have a liquid, right, and you put it there, and it's on the side, you cannot move it. If it's not, for us, as long as it's not Yad Seledet Bo, we cannot move it over the fire to make it Yad Seledet Bo because you're now reheating a liquid on Shabbat, which for us is usher. Okay, if it's a food item that's completely cooked. Right, we can even take it out of the refrigerator and put it on the fire, so that's no problem moving it around. Okay, the real issue would be Also, if food was not yet cooked, right? So it's Friday night, you have stuff on the blech, right? And you want to get to eat it. You can't move it from the side to the middle because now you're causing it to cook faster. You have to pay attention where you're putting it on the blech when you're setting it on the blech Erev Shabbat. Okay, so that plays a difference as well. Okay. Yeah. Once it's completely cooked, because you can't shake it when it's still cooking, because that's also causing it to cook faster. Right? Once it's completely cooked, you can move whatever you want. Completely cooked. Liquid. Solid, you can always move over. A liquid now. Okay.
Before was taking the part of the jar, no,
Okay.
Kettle on hot water kettle.
All right. Now we're going to come in. He holds this. The Tzurba Rabbanan holds page 184. Hanacha lechatchila, the first placement. But I'm going to call this section Hefsek Kedera, okay? Because we're now going to the issue is as follows. So far, we're talking about every time we said you took it noitel me'esh, put it back on the esh, okay? Cover a group. What about taking it from my refrigerator and putting it down? Okay, fine. Let's say we're talking about a solid, but so far we haven't seen that anywhere. No one actually said that. Okay, all we've been saying is noitel me'ala esh, chayzer al esh. So how do we come? How can I take a piece of kugel that's in my refrigerator, take it out Shabbat morning, and put it to heat up? Can that be done? Is that a possibility? So the first thing we're going to deal with is the Beit Yosef brings from the Hagot Mordechai. He brings, if one wakes up in the morning, on Shabbat morning, and he sees his dish is getting burnt, right? He's got his oshusro, got his chamim, his shulent, and it is getting burnt. So Hagot Mordechai says, what do? Remove the pot, okay? Place an empty pot on top of it, okay? And then it's considered as if it's, grufa, covered, it's ketuma, and now you can go ahead and put it on top, okay? Says the Rashba in source 31, why are you allowed to put it al gabe kedera? Shabbat kol tzarcha. It's when it's completely cooked. Okay, so now you can go ahead and put it on. So this case, like Mordechai says, the guy has it agabe straight on the ish. Okay, now he wants to stop it from burning, so put something in between, kedera in between, put the pot on top. The Rasha writes that once one may first place. Now he writes in putting in the first place. Putting on top of the kedera. Okay, not just the food that got burnt, but I have the fire. I put a kedera. Mutter like take like gabe kedera b'shabbat tavshon to shenitbashel me'er Shabbat kol tzurcha. Could go on pandish. Pandish was some sort of kugel. Okay, they would take it and you could put it on Shabbat on top of this kedera. But in order to make it hot, even if to make it yad soleded bo. So says Rashba, you can take a solid item, put it on a kedera that's over the fire, because it's considered next to the fire and not on the fire. Okay, remember, kedera is a pot. So you have a fire, you have the pot on top of it. Remember the Chazon Ish was like, because there's airspace inside, so it heats, it becomes less hot. So maybe that's what the Rashba is going. But that's what so far we have. You have a kedera.
The kedera will look like cooking something like that.
Yeah, the kedera is upside down. Kedera is upside down. It's upside down because you're using the top of it to put stuff.
It's much less in the.
Okay, now we're gonna have two Shulchan Aruchs, and they seem to be not in tandem with each other. Okay, so let's take a look. Shulchan Aruch in source 32. This is Reish Nun Gimel Sif Gimel. He says, he's worried that it's going to get more burnt. It has to be an old back in the old days, if you had a new pot, it wasn't yet complete. You have to get it once hot in order to complete. So you couldn't put a new pot. Today, there's no problem. Our new pots are complete. You shouldn't retain it, right? An empty one. A pia kira on the mouth of the kira. Right? And then you can put it on top. Okay. Now in source 33, which is Sif Hey in the Shulchan Aruch, he writes, Mutter l'tet al pi kederet chamim b'Shabbat. You're allowed to put on a pot of Shabbat, tafshil shnitzvashil me'er Shabbat called tzarcha. Kagon pandish. Okay. So in one case, he says you can put on the kedera something that's on it right now. And the other case, he's saying that you can take something that wasn't there and put it on top of a kedera. So which one is it? Does it have to be there and then it can put it on top of a kedera? Or I can take something that wasn't there at all and put it on top of a kedera. And that is a steer that a lot of the poskim deal with. So the Mishnah Berurah, he writes that there's a difference here. He writes that for putting on top of a kedera, right? You put the kedera backwards, you put it on top. That's where it has to be something that was already there at that time. It has to already be on the fire, and then you can put it on that. But to take something outside and put it on, only do it if that pot is cooking something, not on an empty. Not on an empty. It has to be cooking something inside it. And so that's the difference in the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says, on the Rekanit, you can only put something that was already al eish. You can put it on top of it, right? But if it's cooking something, then you can put something else on top of it. It's being used. Okay? So that's what the Bir Halacha wants to say as well.
Like still the contents, you mean?
It's not considered as being on top of the stove at all. And therefore, it's permitted to place it there even the chatchila on Shabbat. Okay? The empty pot, and is there only to block the heat. Any group which is permitted to place a cooked dish on it, the chatchila on Shabbat. So here the Bir Halacha spells it out very well. So it seems to be Ashkenazim would hold like this. That what? You can't take something from the refrigerator and put it on the kedera that's backwards. You would have to put it on a pot that's there and it's cooking something else and put it on top of that.
You mean the contents or the pot itself?
The pot that's on the fire, right, is cooking something. There's something inside the pot, and now you can use that agabe kedera, the top of the kedera, you can put something on it to warm up. Yeah, Ken Lashkenazim. Ken. You're gonna see because it's some Sfardim also. Chumuvadia has a very interesting shita that most Sfardim hold with. We're gonna see it in a second. Okay, we'll see in a second. Now the Magen Avraham, he says no. That's not what the Shulchan Aruch is talking about. Shulchan Aruch, in two cases, he's dealing with two different things. In the case where he says it has to be on the fire, that's when it's liquid. Liquid has to be atzuleted bo, according to Shulchan Aruch, right? It's to be atzuleted bo. So therefore, I turn the kedera upside down. I can put it, if it's still hot, because it's liquid. But in the other case where you said you can put it on top of the kedera, it's not that something's cooking inside. It's because now I'm dealing with something that's hard, something that's solid. And solid you can return. So that's the Magen Abraham's chiluk between these two sifs in the Shulchan Aruch. Okay? Is it a liquid or not? Which seems that's what we were going with the whole time, right? So let's take now a look on hot plates. Okay, we're still dealing with Sfaradim. We didn't get to it yet. Let's take a look a moment for a hot plate to understand how a hot plate works. Now, a hot plate on Shabbat. Okay, he brings the Chazon Ish here, says the same thing as the Mishnah Berurah was saying. But let's take a look. What about one may place cold food on Shabbat morning on a hot plate or a blech when it's on top of a pot of food. So the Orchot Shabbat, like the Chazon Ish, they're all saying you can only put it if it's on the blech, if you're putting it on top of the pot, not on the blech. You can't put a solid cold food on the blech, according to Ashkenazim. You have to put it on top of the pot that's on the blech. Okay? What about hot plate? Hot plate is different. Hot plates are meant just to retain heat. It's not meant to cook. Okay, so it's better than the blech because the fire under the blech is meant to cook. Okay, now you have the gufa ktuma through the blech, but still the fire is really meant to cook. Therefore, you're putting back a solid only on top of a pot that's on the blech. But the hot plate, maybe it's not never to cook. It's never to cook. So it's better than gufa ktuma. It's never cooking. It's just heat to heat something up. And therefore, maybe you could put it directly on the hot plate. You're right, but it's just grupa, right? And how do you understand that machloket of that steer, so to speak, spear in the Shulchan Aruch, right, was that it's on. So the kedera, and you said you can't put something on it. We were saying because it's empty, it's to be inside something. So therefore, the blech, they're not seeing the blech as being a kedera. They're seeing the blech as being just grupa, and that's not enough. I need to have a kedera with something in it. Therefore, they say to put it on something on top. Okay, but a hot plate's a whole different story. There's no fire there, just retaining heat.
I don't know if they still anymore. We used to have something called the water block.
And what was
It
that?
was basically like it was like kind of like a sheet pan.
Unplugged.
It was my father bought it and he still has it. It's basically it's like a narrow pan, right?
Yeah.
And you fill it with water and then it has like a metal thing on top.
On
So
top.
it's kind of like a very
Okay, so maybe it has to do with the next thing. Also, he writes over here. He says for Ashkenazim, so if they want to heat up something, they should take it on the blech, but not if you take it from the refrigerator. You want to heat it up, the blech. You can take a kedera, turn it upside down, and you can put it there. Because there you have the grupa, and then you have the pot. In the case of Shulchan Aruch, was you putting the pot upside down directly on the fire. Yeah. So here's the blech, there upside down. You can heat it up on top over there. Okay. The Rav Shlomo Zalman, he wanted to say that hot plate is like a kedera on top of a grufa, and you can warm it up directly. But he never gave that psak. Now, here comes the big one. This is the Yakut Yosef. This is the Chevedad, actually. And Chacham Ovadia was asked about the hot plate. And this goes and relates to a blech as well. So, in the Chevedad over here, first of all, he says, why you learn the machloket, like the Ashkenazim are learning the Mishnah Berurah, that the whole machloket was if it's on an empty pot or it's a full pot. Learn the machloket like the Magen Avraham. That what? If it's liquid or not, if it's solid. Okay? Then he says that guess what? A hot plate is definitely considered a hafsek kedera. There's a kedera between the heat element and the food. And they take this and they bring this to the blech. That the blech for Sfaradim is not just girufa, that it's covered, like tumah, but it's actually considered, according to Chamavadia, a hefsek kedera. Even though it's flat, right? Even though it's flat, he sees it as being a kedera. And if it's a hefsek kedera, you can go ahead and put a solid cold food directly on it. Okay, because you learn the Magen Avraham, you're saying the blech and the hot plate is a kedera, because it's covering the source of the heat, and therefore you can put it back on Shabbat, something straight from the refrigerator, as long as it is a solid. Okay, that's how we go ahead and do it. And the Malkiel, this makes more sense to us now, right? Because that's the way we practice, right? Kedera upside down, two kederas on top. Kedera, agave kedera, some of them do, right? The black thing on top. We don't do that. We go directly and we put that. And here he writes, this is the Malechet Bishul for Svaradim. And he writes over here, based on what we were talking about. He writes, then they have the status of that most of the appliances that are used for just warming food, like the hot plates, they have the status of hefsek kedera, because no one will confuse the blech or the hot plate with actual cooking. Okay, it's not cooking on that. Furthermore, with both of these modalities, the heating source is covered. It's garuf, covered. Therefore, you are permitted to place fully cooked food onto a blech or a hot plate, even when the food was previously on the ground, or he took it straight from the refrigerator and it's cold. As long as it's a solid, you can put it straight back. That's fine, because what's the idea? We're saying that the blech is both a gerufa and a hafsek kedera, and therefore you can put it directly on the blech. Makes life a lot easier. Okay, double kederas and all these other things. The truth is that there are Ashkenazic poskim that go with this as well. Okay, he brings over here Mordechai Willig that says as well that a person can do this. The Igrot Moshe, they want to say Rav Moshe may be held like this also, based on a question he was asked. You can see it in source 44. Rav Either wanted to say that the Moshe did hold like that. You can put a solid straight down on a blech, but Rav Moshe's own son, Rav Reuben Feinstein, in source 45, he says, no, that's not what my father meant, and you cannot put it straight on a blech. You would have to put a kedera there in order to do that. Now, regarding the hot plate, it seems more Ashkenazic poskim would say that is a hefsek kedera, the hot plate itself, although some would say wrap it up with silver foil or other things like that, and that would be the hefsek kedera, and that's what comes out from over here. Okay, we're running out of time, so we'll leave. The next thing, warming drawer, is on page 196. I don't even know what a warming drawer is, but so it's like it comes in kitchens apparently, and people have it in the houses. The warming drawers, you'll have to really check if how you use it. Right, very low temperature, so you can never get to yatzoleded bowl.
Like the one that
Okay.
we had in shop.
Oh, that's a warming drawer, but that doesn't have.
So there's not used to it.
So a lot of these things you would have to see how they work exactly and stuff like that. I'm going to leave the next two sections for next week. I want to just do a quick review on the halachot of Chazara based on this Yalkut Yosef that we have over here in the English edition outside. So he writes over here, once one has removed the pot of food from a fire on Shabbat, you're not allowed to put it back unless you have these conditions. First of all, the fire needs to be gufa ktuma, which we said, it has to be covered.
100%.
Okay, the food has to be solid. Okay, we'll talk about liquid in a second, and the food has to be already completely cooked. And if it's a liquid, you need to have two more conditions for sparadim. First of all, it has to be yad soleded bo, okay, in order to put it back onto a heat source, and it cannot be put down on the floor. Okay, but if you have a blech, you can put it back even if you put it on the floor. Okay, now Ashkenazim have a kula by returning liquids. We talked about this last time. They say as long as the liquid is still warmish, okay, still warmish, because they hold the halacha is like the Rambam that you could return, but we're machmer and we don't return cold liquid. But if it's still warmish, we could return it. But at the same time, they have another two conditions. First of all, your hand has to be on it, and that tolach there. And in case shasachak, you need either or. But those are the two conditions for over there. Okay. This comes out the main points of today's shir.
Allow to return warm food.
Yes.
We would not.
And they're holding it.
We would not.
We would not. As long as it's yad soleded. Saying warmish, not yad soleded. Not yad soleded. So it's good to have an Ashkenazic fellow, or even better, have a Temani fellow nearby. My Shabbat Temani. Okay. B'ezrat Hashem, next week we will continue. We'll try to finish up this on the Hatmanat next week. Rabbi Chanina Bekashom Omer, Tzedek Gadol Baruch Hu Zakoi Yisrael, Lefikach Yibal Lahem Torah Mitzvot Shneimar, Adonai Chafetz Leman Tzidko Yagdil Torah Miyadim. Right.